Joining me now is elections correspondent at the Federalist, Brianna Lyman. Brianna, thanks so much for coming on the U.S. Report. I want to ask you about a really disturbing story which speaks to a much bigger problem. There was a weird case where an illegal Chinese migrant was arrested after driving onto a military base in California, and then he refused to leave. Now, Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House didn't give any explanation or words of confidence to the U.S. people who might be wondering just what's going on here. Have a listen to this.
A Chinese national was arrested for trespassing on a California naval base. Does this speak to larger concerns that the White House has about possible Chinese spying, national security, and what are you doing about that?
I just don't want to get too far into it.
Now, I think an awful lot of people would be concerned about this, though, because the number of Chinese nationals that have crossed into the U.S. illegally since October last year has hit over 22,000. Now, Brianna, walk us through this. What is happening here?
Your guess is as good as mine. You know, the Biden administration has obviously been overwhelmed by the border crisis. And when we talk about Chinese migrants in particular, what was really concerning is last year, they actually watered down the vetting process. So Jenny Tarr at the Daily Caller News Foundation last year, she explained that it used to be a 40-question process. So Chinese migrants would be asked a host of questions. It would take hours, right? But because of the backlog that is experienced right now at the border for not just Chinese migrants, but all migrants, they watered it down to 5 questions, right? And the problem that Border Patrol agents ended up saying is that a lot of these migrants were being essentially tutored beforehand on what to say, what not to say, and then they're led into the country and they're allowed to go. They just have to obviously appear in court, and they don't have to appear in court too soon because of this backlog. So we see migrants apparently show up at these California military bases. And what's more concerning is how in the world is our military base is so unsafe that a Chinese illegal immigrant ends up on one?
It's absolutely bizarre to me, as well as the fact that so many Chinese are flying to South America to make this trip when they could just fly in by plane. There's something very strange here, and we need to keep a close eye on it. Now, I want to ask you about this issue. You know, on the right, immigration is the huge issue right now, the borders, the insecurity of the borders. On the left, though, the big issue is abortion, and it seems like Democrats are galvanizing around this, trying to make it front and center, their hot-button issue for this election. Tell us about what their strategy is here. Is the idea to activate that suburban female vote to try and counter everybody who's going to be coming out because they're really, really furious and upset about the election, about the border? Sorry.
Yeah. Abortion's interesting because, like you mentioned, Republicans care about things like crime, immigration, economy, right? Those are the top priorities. Democrats want to make this election about abortion because they know that that's a winning issue for them. That being said, you know, Politico had done an analysis a few weeks ago, and they looked at 5 different races where abortion was a ballot referendum. And what they found was that, yes, voters decisively kept abortion in their respective states. But that turnout wasn't because Democrats mobilized. The turnout was because Republicans actually mobilized. So you saw a bunch of Republicans go out, they voted to keep abortion, but then they voted down ballot for Republicans. And so it turns out that abortion is not the winning issue to galvanize Democrats to the polls. And so if we look at what happened in Florida this week, there's going to be an abortion referendum in November. And Democrats are saying, oh, we might be able to flip Florida. That is a fever dream, right? Because abortion voters in Florida will have the opportunity to have their voices heard on abortion. But when they're choosing a candidate, they are going to be able to rank things like crime, immigration, economy for their choice.
Yeah, and so tell me then, though, what does this tell you then about, you know, when the two issues of migrants and everything that goes along with that, you know, crime and everything else, in the suburbs, these key suburbs, does that then will those issues wind up trumping, so to speak, abortion as an issue for those, particularly that female demographic in those key suburban areas that Democrats really see as their own heartland?
Yeah, and there's 2 good examples for this. So if you look in Virginia, their recent election performance in November was actually closer to their 2020 performance rather than their 2022. And so that is because a lot of suburban voters don't necessarily see abortion as a top issue. And New York 3, which is where George Santos was, they just had a special election in February. And what's interesting is that, yes, Tom Suozzi is a Democrat. He won that. This is a blue state. Of course, you expect that. But he distanced himself from Joe Biden, right? He didn't want to be tied to Joe Biden's track record on immigration, economy, and crime. And so voters are more willing to vote for a Republican or Democrat who can focus on the issues and don't take the same messaging strategy that Joe Biden has. So I think on a national stage, Joe Biden's message himself is not going to be an appeal to voters, whereas Democrats at a state level, at a local level, may be able to distance themselves on those positions and win over voters.
So then what I'm sort of hearing from you then is that a lot of the issues around this whole sort of idea that, you know, Republicans and Donald Trump are going to take away women's reproductive rights, an awful lot of that is that just being confected then by the media, which is trying to gee up an issue that they can use to bash Republicans? Is this a media confection, a lot of this?
Yeah, and actually, you know, the real person to blame here, or people to blame, is the Republicans. And the reason I say that is, look, Democrats are a lot of things, but one thing I can say is that as a party, not the voters, but as a party, their platform is united. Republicans have not been able to replicate that when it comes to abortion. You have people who say 6 weeks, people who say 15, people who say 12. There is no national cohesive message, and that's damaging to Republicans, because if they're not defining their message, Democrats and the media are, and that's what they've been doing. So that's why they're able to so successfully say Republicans are coming after your rights. They're going to take away birth control, because Republicans have no forceful unity to go out there and tell them their own message on abortion, which is why they have to kind of get together, I think, at least before July, and let Americans know this is our national policy as a party on abortion, and that's how we're going to go moving forward.